Welcome, Pewter Report readers and listeners, to another edition of the Pewter Report podcast, Energized by our friends over at Celsius. Scott Reynolds is with us today on the show, and I am, of course, John Ledyard. We are joined today, Scott, by a very special guest from NFL Films Greg Cosell. We have been itching to get Greg in here to talk about this crazy Bucs offense, Tom Brady, Bruce Arians, even the Bucs defense a little bit today. So, Greg, it is really an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for making the time.
Oh, John, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I forgot to dress up today. You know, the good thing about NFL Films is I can come to work in a sweatshirt and all that. So, hopefully that's okay.
Hey, that's the good thing about Pewter Report, too. That's what Scott tells me, right, Scott? I can.
Yes, that's right. Dress comfortably. Let's talk some football. That's
right. Yeah,
Scott and I, John, go way back. So I haven't seen Scott in years, but we go back at least probably 20 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've covered this team for 25 years. Yeah.
There you go.
For about 20. And, a huge admirer of your work at NFL Films and, the NFL matchup show. I probably watched the first episode of it way back in the day, and a huge fan of your uncle's as well, Howard Cosell. So
I appreciate it. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, it's we got a lot of ground to cover today, and Greg is we're just pumped to be able to be getting his insight, and so it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk Bucs offense, Bucs defense, and all of it is going to be brought to you by our good friends over at Celsius.
Well, John, Celsius powers active lives every day with essential functional energy. And my wife Ashley wanted me to give a shout out to the watermelon flavor. That's her flavor. It's her favorite one. And they come in all sorts of varieties. For fall, they've got the Fuji apple pear, which is a great fall flavor. A couple other fruity flavors are the wild berry and
that's the one I need to try.
Yeah, and the thing is some of these flavors appeal to women, maybe more than men. And even though this is a show that has 95% male audience, guys, for Christmas, get your wife a cup of Celsius. It makes a great gift. You can go on our website, pewterreport.com, click on those Celsius banners. They'll take you right to Amazon, where you can buy them a case at a time and save some money that way. So if you're not sure which flavor you and your significant other want to try, get the variety pack, and that way, problem solved.
Yeah, my wife I know is going to be drinking them. She's already started drinking them a little bit, and she's enjoyed them so far. So it's going to be on the Christmas list, I think. Greg, we are pumped to have you on the show today because there might not be a more a bigger topic right now in the NFL than the Bucs offense, which really has been good. I mean, it's the highest scoring offense in Bucs history. Scott and I were talking about the other day. But the reality is that the expectations are so high for a group like this that sometimes when they haven't met them, they can seem like things are failing, and when really it's just kind of maybe some bumps in the road. So I'll just ask you kind of generally off the top, and then we'll move to more specific stuff. But you've watched the Tom Brady, you've watched Bruce Arians, you knew both of them. You and I talked over the summer for an article I did about, kind of what this offense could look like, how Brady could operate within this offense, how everybody could kind of flow and generate high-level production in this offense. What have been your general observations so far, specifically how Tom Brady has played in this Bruce Arians offense and the level of comfort that he's had?
Well, John, let me get to that in a sec, because I think one thing that I think stands out, and again, this is sort of a philosophical conversation. Some will agree, some will disagree, but I think one of the things that stands out to me is there's no week-to-week sense to me as to what they think their running game is. And I think, again, we're not going to get into the whole conversation about the concept of balance. I know there's a lot of people who believe balance is a anachronistic term in the NFL now, that you don't need balance. Then there's other people who believe you do. So we won't get into that. But at the end of the day, somewhere along the line, you do have to run the football. Now, it's not a number. We're not going to apply a number to it. Oh, if you don't have 25 rushes, you can't have a good offense. That's not my point. But my point is there has to be some running game on a week-to-week basis. And in my view, there has to be some sense of what that running game is philosophically. Every week does present a different defense and different challenges, but there has to be some sense that, hey, this is what our offense kind of looks like. And we're going to try to play like that unless we're forced to play differently. And my sense watching the Bucs is, from an identity standpoint, that they seem to be week to week uncertain as to what that identity and philosophical approach is.
And you believe then that watching that running game and their uncertainty kind of about how to approach it, whether schematically or idealistically, you think that is having then a ripple effect on quarterback play, down and distances that they're in, production and efficiency of the passing offense as well?
And again, I'll give you my view. That's all I can give you. I don't think, no matter how great your quarterback is, whether it's Russell Wilson, who is having, an MVP year until a few weeks ago, whether it's Patrick Mahomes, they're in a different situation because of the players that surround Patrick Mahomes. But I think back to the game yesterday with Roethlisberger, I think it's very hard in this league with how good defenses are to ask your quarterback, no matter how good he is, to drop back by choice 40 plus times every week.
Sure.
I think that's a hard deal. Can you do it some weeks? Of course you can. And we've seen it done. But I think especially, and I'll add this caveat, especially if your quarterback does not have second reaction movement ability, because at some point the defense is going to win downs. And when they win downs, if your quarterback can't really make plays outside of the structure of the offense, it's very difficult to ask him to drop back 45 times every week.
This is the second year that I've covered Bruce Arians here in Tampa, and even last year, right, with Jameis Winston, there were games where they were down early, and it just seems like they abandoned the running game so quickly, and that was kind of the case on Sunday, right? They were down 17-0 in the first quarter. They were down 14-0 to the Rams, or I should say to the Saints, in that game where they only ran the ball 4 times and had one quarterback kneel down. But Greg, how much of this, and I hear the lip service from Bruce Arians, I think he wants to run the ball more and have that balance, but at the same time, he's the quarterback whisperer. He's a former quarterback's coach, right? He's got a former NFL quarterback calling the plays, and he's got Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time. So he's kind of betraying his own desire, right? By what he is. He is a guy that likes to throw the ball, and he's got a play caller who was a former quarterback, and he's got Brady, right? So is that just too much for Arians to resist?
Well, no risk it, no biscuit, right? That's Bruce's motto. But I think it then depends on other parts of your team. Look, we know they have a very good receiving core. There's no question. We don't need to discuss that or debate that. But then you also have to think about your offensive line, because like I said, look, Brady is great. And let me just give you a quick aside here. I was really fortunate in my career, and it's probably the greatest influence on my career. I've been doing this a long time. It's my 41st NFL season at NFL Films. So I was very fortunate to get to know Bill Walsh and spend time with him. And he really taught me the quarterback position. And I feel, very grateful that happened. But he would tell me stories. He coached Dan Fouts for 1 year. I think it was 1976. So it was just before Air Coryell. And Fouts attributes Walsh with basically turning around his career. And then we obviously know what happened with San Francisco and Montana. But Walsh told me that there were certain routes, for instance, route concepts that he would call with Dan Fouts that he didn't call with Joe Montana, because Joe Montana couldn't throw those the way Dan Fouts could, because they were different quarterbacks. So when people hear that, they think, oh, you're crazy. Joe Montana, the best, blah, blah, blah. Well, every quarterback is different. Bruce Arians coached Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer is a big physical, big-armed quarterback, a deep drop quarterback with a power arm and unbelievable anticipation. He's different than Tom Brady. We're not saying who's better. That's not my point. Yep. Clearly, Brady is better when you look, in history. Right. But quarterbacks are different. And sometimes you need to, and this is no knock on Bruce Arians, but sometimes quarterbacks do fit with the rest of your team. And I would argue, look, John, I know you probably study the individuals on the Bucs O-line more than I do. You work for Pewter Report. The Bucs are your thing. I'm trying to watch, 14 games every week, so I can't sit and chart Ali Marpet every snap. I just can't do it. So, I could be saying something that's wrong, and you can please correct me. I don't think this is a great pass protecting O-line. That's just my opinion from watching their tape. So given that plays into the nature of your pass game. Because then if you're going to ask your quarterback who's not a mover to have deeper drops to get the ball down the field, you have to take that into account in the way you structure your pass game. Because otherwise he's going to be under pressure. And Brady's been under pressure a lot this year.
Right. Do you think, in the context of what you're saying, and there have certainly been games where that pass protection's been leaky. I think of the game without Mally Marpet, where the Saints game, where Joe Haig was in the game at left
guard, and then
guard,
they made the switch because he really had a tough time.
Exactly. Yeah, he really had a tough time, and they've had some, against the best, even the Chiefs. It was a lot of blitzing. It was a lot of extra guy. We got to account for him with the scheme, basically. And so, but even given all that, you talked about Bruce Arians' offense and the deeper drops and things like that. And if you look at sack numbers for Bruce Arians' quarterbacks over the year, they've typically been very high. 40s, 50, a couple times if it. But Brady, in the context of all that, has still kind of barely been sacked. He's on pace to only be sacked 21 times this season, which would probably be one of the better marks in the NFL. Does that speak to who Brady is as a quarterback and how he's is he continuing to thrive as a guy that still hardly takes sacks in an offense where the quarterback is sacked a lot? Has he kind of overcome some of those schematic situations that Arians' offense might put him in?
Well, he'll get rid of the football because he can't move and make plays with second reaction ability. He'll throw it away. I can remember one play from this week. I think it was actually a play. It might have been early in the game. I can't remember where I think Brown was in the backfield. They were in 10 personnel and he ran the wheel route and he just threw it out of bounds. He wasn't open anyway because I forget who was defending him, but the play didn't work as designed, but there was pressure. He just threw it out of bounds. Brady will get rid of the football. He's not going to stand there. He's not like Roethlisberger, who Arians also coached, who's going to stand there and stand there and stand there because he's 6'5", 250, and he's a big oak tree and he can push people away. Brady's not going to do that. He's going to get rid of the football. So I think he prevents sacks very often by just throwing incompletions.
Yeah, it's interesting. You think about Bruce Arians' quarterbacks over the years and the things that, everybody's kind of said, oh, there's lots of yards, there's touchdowns, there's lots of passing production, but then the interceptions, and that was obviously with Jameis, it was kind of like this huge number, obviously with the 30 and the 5 fumbles, it was kind of like turnovers. How can a Bruce Arians offense ever move past the sacks and the turnovers? If they can do that, I feel like we'll be kind of moving in the right direction as a group. And, here the Bucs are highest scoring off. What did you say yesterday? 28.7 points per game, Scott, for this Bucs offense. So moving toward 30 points per game, and they're terrific in the red zone. One of the best teams in the NFL in the red zone. And the sacks are down, and the turnovers, even though everybody's like, oh, Brady, he's throwing 11 picks, he's going to throw less less interceptions than most quarterbacks Bruce Arians has ever had. And yet still you've heard this kind of, it's underwhelming. It's not quite what the product, that was promised.
It's an expectation issue because it's Brady and it's these receivers. So the thought is that they should be putting up 35 and it should be unbelievable. Based on what you just said, it's been pretty good. And by the way, if you're scoring 29 points a game, you should win a lot of games. So what's their record at this point?
7-5.
Yeah. So that, again, that does not seem like the record I'm sure people expected. So, and look, you guys have been around long enough to know there's many reasons why teams win and many reasons why teams lose. It can never be just pinpointed on one particular player. But I do think that if you wanted to focus particularly on Brady, which I know everybody does, I think I've watched every Bucs offensive game this year for obvious reasons. So I think I can speak to that to some degree. He has been under a lot of duress, and the thing that happens, Brady is what's always made Brady great to me is the repetitive mechanics. Everybody talks about other things that to me are people's always got the it factor, but that's all to me that's meaningless. He does the same thing all the time. Baseball, sabermetrics and analytics have been around in baseball for going back to the 80s. I remember a guy named Bill James. I used to read all his stuff. I loved it. So people say Brady's clutch. Well, the reality is Brady does the same thing on the first play that he does on the last play. It's just the last play is closer to the end of the game. So people say he's clutch. He just does the same thing all the time. They used to say that about Derek Jeter in baseball. He's clutch. Well, then somebody did a study and he did the same thing in innings 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and 7 through 9 because he just does the same thing all the time. He was great. Brady's been the same way. So he's great because he's so repetitive with his mechanics in every single thing he does. So now when you get him under pressure and the mechanics can't exactly be the same, to me, one thing the tape shows is I think he's had a tendency, because he's been under pressure, he starts to anticipate pressure a little bit. That's I'm extrapolating from watching the tape. So I think he's rushing his mechanics at times. And he is such a mechanics quarterback. Look, he's a guy that even after he was a first ballot Hall of Famer would still go out and work with his quarterback coach, Tom Martinez, because he understood what he was as a quarterback. Yeah. Reminds me of Bill Walsh telling me the story that Joe Montana, after his first year in Kansas City, when Montana was already a first ballot Hall of Famer with all the Super Bowls, called Coach Walsh after his first season in Kansas City. And Coach Walsh at that point was out. He was not coaching in the NFL. And Joe said, "Coach, can I come visit you? I didn't feel my mechanics were as good this year as when we were together. I need you to brush up." And this was after Montana, like I said, 14, 15-year player. Yeah. I think Brady's the same way. He's a repetitive mechanics guy. And I think that when you start to be under pressure, which is a function of deeper drops and more vertical route concepts, he starts to rush his mechanics a little bit.
Well, one thing that was not rushed, Greg, was this offseason, because we didn't have one in the NFL due to COVID-19, right? So how much that's a factor,
Scott. That's a factor.
It is, right? Because I think a lot of fans want to sit there and say, okay, well, 12 weeks into the season, shouldn't this team be further along? And I kind of went back to the NFL calendar. And if you sit there and say, okay, you have 5 weeks of OTAs and minicamp where there's no game planning, it's strictly focused on mechanics and play installation and building rapport, that chemistry, right, between the receivers and the quarterbacks. And so you don't have that. You've got a truncated training camp. Instead of having a 5-week training camp with 4 preseason games, you've got essentially 2 weeks of padded practices.
Right.
And then Tom Brady gets his first live action with guys like Mike Evans and Rob Gronkowski and stuff in a Bucs uniform against Cameron Jordan and the New Orleans Saints, right? So how much of what we're seeing, and again, I'm not one of these people that's panicking. I mean, Brady's on pace to throw for 4,400 yards, 37 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. That's way better than any Bruce Arians quarterback in his first scheme, as John pointed out this week on an article on PeterReport.com. But how much are those missed weeks, those 8 weeks or so in August and then June and May, still affecting this team?
I think it takes a while. Look, because he's Tom Brady, people just assume it's going to happen like that. Right. And it doesn't, because don't forget, he was in the same offense for a very, very, very long time. And because he's a repetitive guy, that's his thing. Now he's starting from scratch. My guess is the terminology is different. My guess is the concepts are different. My guess is they're taught differently. And as smart as Brady is, and he's incredibly smart, it's still all different. Another coach I've known well for 100 years is Al Saunders, who's, started in 1978 in the NFL. And he had a great analogy to me. He said, what offensive terminology is, it's like learning a foreign language. He said, ordering a hamburger and French fries it's always the same, but obviously if you go to France, it's different words than you say in the United States. So now you're starting. So some of the concepts might be the same, but they're expressed differently. They're talked about differently. So these things come into play. And when you literally start that in August in a truncated training camp where there's no true off season, say what you want about Zoom and StreamYard and all these wonderful things that we now know about that we never knew about a year ago, it's still not the same as going through an off season. And it just takes time. And this happens to be a totally different offense. And I know people say, well, why isn't he running the Patriots offense? That's kind of a silly thing to say. Bruce Arians has been doing this a long time. He's been pretty successful. There are things you see that I see on tape that Brady did with the Patriots. But
Yeah.
Bruce runs his offense. He's been
Right.
pretty good at it. So, you can't just say, oh, well, he should do what Tom did. He should run Josh McDaniels' offense. We all know it doesn't work like that.
Right. Well, and also too, from a pure math standpoint, right? It's like you've got 11 players out there on offense on any given play, and a lot of those guys, most of those guys, with the exception of Tristan Wirfs and Rob Gronkowski and Leonard Fournette, I mean, were in this offense last year, so they've learned it. It's easier to only have a couple of guys learn the entire playbook than to have 8 out of the 11 learn it. And then to my other point about Brady, you were talking about foreign languages and stuff. Isn't it true? Do you think that sometimes it's not just learning a new offense, but when you've done something one way for 20 years, it's kind of unlearning that offense too, right?
Yes. It's funny you say that. And again, it won't be quite like this with Brady because obviously he's been around and he's very smart. But most offensive coaches believe that when all's said and done, it truly takes about 4 years for a quarterback, let's say a young quarterback, to really become proficient in a particular offense, because the way they talk about it, they say it takes 2 years to truly learn your offense, truly learn it, where you're aware of every element, every check, every audible, every element. And then it takes 2 more years to learn everything about all the defenses in the NFL.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, Brady is past that, but still he was starting over with new terminology and new ways to express things. And it takes time, because not only does he have to learn it, he has to express it to everybody else in a way that he's comfortable with and everybody else is comfortable with. So that does take time. And look, at the end of the day, as John mentioned, or Scott, one of you guys mentioned the numbers, it's not like we're talking about a bad season.
Right.
It's just the team is 7-5, and I'm sure they expected them to be 11-1, or 12-0, but it's not like Brady's having a bad season.
Right. It's just been a little bit choppy, and especially in some primetime performances. And we all know recency bias, and being in those primetime games leaves an impression on fans, and they don't evaluate, like you said, watching every game and the context and stuff. But one of the big question marks, Greg, this is a 2-part question. I'll ask you the first part and listen to your answer, then I'll come back with a follow-up on something we talked about this summer. The big topic of conversation, you and I even touched on it when we talked in the summer, was the deep ball in Bruce Arians' offense, the vertical ball in Tom Brady, and how can those things come together in this offense? Well, people kind of overlook the fact that Tom Brady's actually always thrown the deep ball way more than people think he has. But regardless, outside of that, they start off first 7 weeks of the season and they're on this torrid pace. The deep ball is clicking. Everything's great on Tom Brady throwing the deep ball. Then they go through a 4-game stretch highlighted mainly by the Rams and Saints games where Tom Brady was 0 for 11 on throws of 20 yards or more in the air. As we mentioned, a lot of those were miscommunication issues. The majority of them were. It wasn't like it was inaccurate balls or drops. It was just like guys were not on the same page to a degree. Outside of those 2 games, he's been 22 of 54 on throws of 20-plus yards in the air with 4 drops. And so I say that to say, well, what's been your evaluation so far of Tom Brady and being able to throw the ball down the field in this offense?
Well, it's funny you say that, John, because again, and this may be blasphemous in Tampa or maybe all over, but I thought he missed a few that were there where his ball placement was not what it should have been. I mean, that's what the tape told me. So I thought he missed a few. And you know what? That does happen. But it was in that stretch too. And I can't remember.
Panthers game,
a couple plays in my mind. I just can't remember the exact plays, but he missed a few that he normally makes, and he missed them in a way that he doesn't normally miss them. It's one thing you miss it off a guy's fingers, you miss it by 8 inches. He missed them where I thought he just missed them. They were not very good throws, and that does happen. That's obviously those kinds of throws are more a part of this offense than they were with the Patriots offense. So there are more of those kinds of throws, but he's never been a bad deep ball thrower. And the reality is his arm's always been better than I think a lot of people think it is. And I don't think there's been a drop off in his ability to throw a football by any stretch of the imagination. I think he throws the ball well. It's just like you say, there's been miscommunications. There's just been some inaccurate throws here and there. And the run game, they don't get much out of the run game at all. It's funny. when Leonard Fournette came out of college, I really liked his college tape. I knew what he was. I mean, he was not a back with great, core quickness or lateral agility. He wasn't that guy, but I thought he'd be a really good NFL back. And I got to tell you, what really stands out to me, and I don't know what they thought he'd be when they brought him in, because at that point, I know they kept talking about Ronald Jones. I don't know if they truly thought of him as a true foundation back. Obviously, he's sort of become that guy for them. But Leonard Fournette, to me, I don't know what happened to him, but his vision is just not very good. There have been so many runs this year where I'm watching the tape and it's like I'm talking to the TV, Leonard, it's tape, right there for you. Why are you cutting right into the defenders?
We have a segment on Wednesdays, Greg, and we just call Leonard, and we just show Leonard plays of him running into the defenders, and
because that wasn't the case coming out of college. I mean, he was a fascinating player in college. Now he got hurt a little bit, but I really thought he was an explosive player. The other thing is in the NFL, he's become a little bit of a tiptoe guy, and he wasn't like that in college. He would hit it, and he's become a little bit of a choppy tiptoe guy. And I'm not sure he'll ever be a true feature back again. I guess time will tell. But certainly the right now he's not seen that way by the Bucs coaching staff.
Yeah, right. It's been a disappointing result for Fournette, I think, for sure. He's kind of locked himself into like a third down pass catching type of role, which I don't think anyone would have envisioned coming out, because that was the big question mark. And the big emphasis was he can run with power and he's fast, and we don't see any of those things. So it's been a script flip for him, although he's not that great as a receiver either. But I wanted to kind of ask you, as we were talking about the vertical ball in this offense, the Mike Evans production story has been wild this season. You and I talked this summer, and I asked you, I remember, because you gave me kind of an answer that was really interesting to me. I asked you, do you think Mike Evans could have a drop-off in production this year, just because, not necessarily because he isn't good or he and Brady don't have good chemistry, but because I can't see the volume of balls going his way, a healthy Chris Godwin over every game, the volume of balls might not go Mike Evans' way. He still have good yards per catch production, in my opinion. That's what I thought, but the volume might not go his way. And you were like, I don't know. I don't want to anticipate those things ahead of time. And I was like, that's a good point. Let's see how it goes. They get into training camp and they're lighting it up, in training camp, obviously practices, but Mike Evans and Tom Brady are totally on the same page. And then Chris Godwin's hurt and banged up, and the beginning of the season's a little bit rocky, but there's all this touchdown production. But as the season's gone on, it seemed like they're less on the same page. There's like lots of miscommunications and Mike Evans stopping his routes. And we talked with Mark Schofield yesterday about hot routes and Mike Evans playing more in the slot this season and maybe not as aware of the hot routes as he should be. And so they need to get on the same page there. I guess just what's been your impression of those two? Are they a fit moving forward? Can they figure this thing out? Because Brady has thrown to him a ton. I mean, he's thrown to him more than anybody else on the team by a lot. It just hasn't necessarily been – there's been moments where it's great, but it hasn't been smooth necessarily all the way.
No, and I think they will figure it out. I mean, I think you're talking about two great players. Look, I love Mike Evans. I love his talent. I think he's a terrific receiver. So I think they will figure it out. I think it's your typical growing pains. I mean, I remember, I think Carolina was week 2, right after the Saints game.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember there was a throw in that game that it's actually one of Brady's best throws of the year. It was a 50-yarder for Evans. It was against cover 2, and he threw it right over the middle hole defender. And I don't know if you guys remember that play, but it was just a great, great throw, and it was right on Evans' hands. And, I'm thinking about, and that game he had over 100 yards, as I recall. Yeah. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going to work out. And they've had their moments, John, as you suggested, but clearly it's still a work in progress. And I guess because I've been doing this a long time, I'm not surprised by that, because this does take time, and who knows what the last 4 games will show. But I'm one of those guys. I don't look at the playoff picture. I let it play out the way it plays out. So I don't know where the Bucs stand. I don't do that. So I don't know what the deal is. Obviously, if they didn't make the playoffs, that would be viewed as a major disappointment, clearly. So I don't know where they stand now, but I think this will play out over time. Look, the touchdown he caught this week was obviously a really good route and a really good throw. I think you'll start to see a little more of that. They got a lot of, it's funny. They got a lot of players. They got a lot of really good weapons. Now they have Antonio Brown. I know his numbers aren't great, but I think he looks pretty good on film the way he's moving.
Right. Yeah. It's been, I think it was the game that the instance you're thinking of with Evans. I mean, there's been a couple of them this season where you talk about the Chargers game early in the season, the Bucs game, and where they found that connection on the vertical ball. But it does seem like it's two guys who can figure it out. I mean,
Right.
because the flashes are there. And you talked about Mike Evans this offseason. I mean, you were like telling me, you're like, I don't think we talk about this guy enough as a top 3 receiver. I mean, he just is a great all around game.
Yeah, I mean, so that will happen. It's just when will it happen? But it will happen. I mean, I think you're dealing with. We know what Brady is. I believe I know what Evans is. I don't know Mike Evans personally, but I think that will work out.
Greg, I'm a defensive guy, but before I switch to that side of the ball, I want to ask you one more question about offense. What are your thoughts on the guy that's kind of been the silent guy among that offensive line, and usually that's a good thing, right? When you don't hear about offensive linemen, right? That's a good thing. If they're not giving up sacks, they're not having penalties.
Right.
If their name isn't announced on the TV broadcast, usually a good thing. Alex Kappa, he's made a lot of strides at right guard. I don't think he's ever going to be a dominant player or anything like that, but just what have you seen from him? And then the guy next to him who has gotten his share of accolades as a rookie, Tristan Wirfs. What do you think about the right side of the offensive line with Kappa in his second year as a starter and the improvement he's made? And Wirfs is, I think, really good rookie season so far.
Well, I hate to answer it this way, Scott, but I'm going to, for people who know me, I don't make stuff up. I haven't watched Kappa individually enough to answer that question. I've watched Wirfs just because he's a rookie and I did him hard coming out of Iowa. So, and plus I work with Matt Bowen. So Matt Bowen talks to me about Iowa nonstop.
He does,
So, I've watched Wirfs, who I think's been really, really good. Every rookie has a bad snap here and there, but I think Wirfs has been really, you guys probably, I know, John, you probably study him in more detail than I do, but I think he's played like a veteran. He's been really good. Yeah. He's composed. He's poised. We knew he had physical traits, but I think he's been really impressive. He's got really good strength. He's got good movement. Because I got to tell you, watching him, there were times at Iowa where I thought, oh, maybe he's better as a guard. And hey, I'll be the first to tell you, I'm wrong. I think he's been, he's going to be a really good right tackle. But Kappa, Scott, I just haven't seen him enough individually to be able to answer that. And I did not do him coming out because I was going to get to him, but he was a small school kid, and I just never got a chance to get to him.
Whenever you draft an offensive tackle, right, in the top 10, top 15 or so, you always hear the draft analysts on television say, well, he's the kind of guy that you draft him and you stick him in there for 10 years, right? I mean, the guy
Wirfs was that guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like the guy that comes to my mind, and you'll remember this name, Paul Gruber, right? He was a left tackle out of Wisconsin, but he just stepped in as a rookie left tackle and just played like a veteran for 12 years. Just boom, like there he was. And I think
Wirfs to me has all pro ability. I mean, I think we could be talking about him as an all pro. He's been really solid this year, but I think he's an all pro type guy going forward.
Yeah, there's some guys, this, Greg and Scott, this, that when you put on the tape, and I mean, I saw week 1 against Cam Jordan, and it was just like, he's different. He's just different. Like, and I saw it like you did, Greg. I liked things about him in college. I mean, he was my OT. He was my second offensive tackle.
Who was your first?
Jedrick Wills was my first.
Mine too.
Yeah.
I love Jedrick Wills.
Yeah. He played and he's nasty. And with Wirfs, I was just like, man, he has all the potential in the world. He can be one of the best guys in the league. I just don't know how fast it's going to come together. And it's come together quickly.
And
so
there's
it's
a bad
fun.
Play here and there. I mean, look, that happens. I think, was it the first play in the second Saints game where he just got driven back by Cam Jordan, I believe? There'll be some bad plays. Look, that happens with everybody.
Right.
No tackle in this league bats 1,000 for sure. Last offensive question I want to ask you about, Greg, before I let Scott switch things over to his favorite side of the ball in the defense real briefly before we let you go, is the connection, the chemistry and the connection of Antonio Brown in this offense, an offense that obviously he's played in before, briefly for Bruce Arians before, but him in this offense, and not only Antonio Brown in this offense, but what it's meant for the group, and that Scotty Miller, who was actually the Bucs' leading receiver by yards because of Evans being banged up and Godwin missing 4 games, but also because Scotty Miller was playing great football. He has kind of stepped out of the lineup. I mean, his snaps have been non-existent, basically. I think he has like 1 catch for 4 yards in the last couple games. And Antonio Brown is inserted into that lineup. and has done some good things, but the explosive play Scotty Miller provided haven't been there. Do you like that trade-off? Do you see it some being more about fit than about necessarily Antonio Brown just being, obviously Antonio Brown's better than Scotty Miller, but isn't fit important too when you're evaluating all that?
Well, again, that's a tough question because now you're dealing again with the work in progress concept. Obviously Antonio Brown's better than Scotty Miller, but Antonio Brown wasn't here and Scotty Miller was. So, as a coaching staff, do you say, well, we're not going to play Antonio Brown, even though he's got more talent and at his best? I mean, we don't know. I don't know where Antonio Brown is in his career right now, but certainly he was one of the 5 best receivers in football in Pittsburgh. So the question is, what do you do? Obviously it appeared that Brady had some kind of connection with Scotty Miller and that was working, but here's Antonio Brown, who's just better than Scotty Miller when you look at physical traits. So that's going to take time as well, John. I don't know. I'm not there every day,
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer to that is, but Brown is clearly more talented.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, so let's talk some defense. We've got quite a few fans that have joined us here in the chat, and we're not necessarily taking their questions, but one of the topics that's come up is a guy that I thought was off to a phenomenal start this year, Vida Veya. How much are the Bucs missing Vida Veya? And from what you've seen on tape, what does this defensive front look like now with Raheem Nunez, Roches, and Steve McClendon in there, as opposed to where it was with Vida Veya at the beginning of the season, Greg?
Well, again, now you're dealing with players who are not as good as Vida Veya.
Yeah.
And so, it's going to be different and arguably not as good. And I think, Vida Veya to me, and I remember watching him coming out of college, because of his body type, I think there was the thought of many people that he was just a big run plugger. He's actually very light on his feet. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he would have been a 15 sack guy, but I mean, he was more than just a guy you plug into the middle of your defense just to stop the run. Yeah. I think eventually he would have shown some pretty good pass rush skills and would have been a factor as a pass rusher. So yeah, there's a drop off for sure. And there's no question that hurts your defense.
I think the one guy that it's hurt a lot is Devon White, because those two guys work those A gaps really, really well together. And Vida would either control the center or he would draw the double team, and it just seemed like those A gaps, whether it was the strong side or the weak side, whatever gap White was hitting was just larger, right? When Veya was in there, and I think that we haven't seen Devon White get home nearly enough without Veya's presence in there as an A-gap blitzer.
Yeah, and I think there was also a sense of expectation too, just like there is with the offense, that after that Green Bay game, that this team was just going to be a dominant defensive team every single week, and that's the way they were going to play every single week. They were just going to blitz and dominate, and we know the league doesn't work like that.
Right.
And don't forget, again, it's very much like offense. We talked about this earlier, that it's not just your quarterback, it's your whole offense. You have to take into account everybody you put out there. I mean, obviously, Jamal Dean, is he on IR?
No, he just missed the last game with the
okay, because I know he missed the last game, and obviously they played Cockrell, who's been around the league, and they kept Murphy Bunting on the outside. But their corners, for instance, Davis and Dean, and I know Todd Bowles likes big, physical, competitive corners, and they are that, but they're also not twitchy, explosive movers. So you have corners who are certain kinds of players. So that means, you can't play the exact same way every week. Look, I know everybody saw the 44-yard touchdown to Tyreek Hill. Everybody saw the 75-yard touchdown to Tyreek Hill. The 44-yarder was man, obviously. The 75-yarder was cover 3, and Davis played with a big cushion, and Hill just ran by him. I mean, he gave him a 10-yard cushion. Hill just ran by him, and he's going to run by a lot of people. So, people now think, oh, Carlton Davis stinks. He's a certain kind of corner. Do I think he's a top 5 corner in the league as we speak now? No. But Carlton Davis has pretty good ability and could be a very good player, but he's a certain kind of player. And, I think Dean is another big kid. They're both out of Auburn. They're kind of built the same way. They're certain kinds of players. So you have to understand what they are and what that means depending on who you're playing.
Yeah. So given the fact that there's certain kinds of players, and I think you're exactly right, Greg. We've been saying this all season, especially with Carlton Davis, when he has been impressed, man, and I know he did get beat for one touchdown by Tyreek Hill, but his coverage
he was in the
beautiful.
inside slot, which that's a tough spot too. I'm sure he's not used to playing there.
Right. I was actually thinking of another touchdown, the third touchdown. I guess I have to differentiate which touchdown, but later in the game, I mean, it was like he's in a perfect position. The ball comes in right over.
Right. I remember that.
And again, so it's like, man, so anyway, I say that to say Carlton Davis has been great this year in press man, but the Bucs have been a majority of the time, they've been a zone team. And so you talk about fits of players to scheme. And I think it's a great observation because you look at these guys, Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Carlton Davis, and you're like, these are press man corners, right? I mean, they're big, they're long, they're athletic, and yet they're not really playing in press. Does that surprise you so far about Todd Bowles' defense this season?
I guess I would expect to see a little more. I mean, I remember Murphy-Bunting coming out of college, and I loved him. He was sort of, because he wasn't a big school guy, a Power 5 guy. Maybe a lot of people weren't aware of him, but I remember watching his tape and loving that kid. And I thought when the Bucs drafted him, I thought, wow, they got a player. He kind of showed last year in the last half of the season as well as a rookie. But yeah, I mean, you could make that argument. Look, if Todd Bowles was sitting here and we asked him, I'm sure he'd have an answer, and we'd listen to it when you go, you know what, that's a good answer. Because coaches don't do stuff on a whim. It's always easy. Look, we know how the business works. When teams lose, because we now have access to the results, it's always easy to rip everything. That's easy. I'm a process guy because I love the tape study, and I try to think it through from a process standpoint, which is why I don't struggle with analytics. I think it's an important part of our jobs and what we do, but analytics is results based. I'm a process guy. And coaches, yes, are they judged on one loss, which is a result, but that's not what their week is. Their week is all about process.
Right.
And I'm sure Todd Bowles would have a great explanation. Do they appear to be better press man corners? Yeah, they do. But he knows probably he certainly knows more than I do about them. You guys are I know, Scott, you're there. John, I guess you're going to be there if you're not already. So, there's an answer for that. I couldn't tell you what it is.
Well, no, I think you're right, Greg. And when you talk about process, you're talking about practice, right? It's not just the games. And we even
practice.
Yeah, well, right. when just so people understand, when the media, like PewterReport.com, when we go and get to watch practice, it's the first 30 minutes are open, right? And 15 of that is calisthenics. That's really what it is, stretching. The other 15 is just light individual work. It's quarterbacks, just throwing to receivers, getting some timing down. There's no scheme. There's no one-on-ones. There's no 11-on-11, no 7-on-7 that we get to watch. We're kicked out before that happens. And these coaches see what happens Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Right.
So they have 3 of those examples plus the previous week's game, which is 4.
And history as coaches. Look, I've been fortunate in my career just because I've done it a long time, and I guess I'm respected by coaches. So I get to talk to coaches. Yeah, there's never one time when a coach, you ask them a question, and maybe because they respect me, we actually can have a good conversation where a coach goes, I don't know why I did any of that. I don't really have a clue why. They always give you an answer, and the answer is really good. Yeah. Not everything works. Don't forget, there's a lot of really good coaches. The old expression is, of course, the other team and the other coaches get paid too. These guys are pretty smart. Now, because the result isn't always great, fans immediately go, fans automatically think if a team's 4-12, the coaches are idiots. That's not the way it works. These guys are all pretty good at what they do. So there's always going to be an answer. We don't have all the details that gives us the necessary information.
Right. Yeah. And it's difficult because you want to evaluate players and be able to say things too about players. Like you'd like to be able to look at Sean Murphy-Bunting near the end of his second season and say, this is a guy that I was right about or I was wrong, because I, like you, liked him a lot coming out, but I saw him in a different role than he's typically playing now. He's been, when Jamel Dean's healthy, which has been most of the season, Sean Murphy-Bunting's often in the slot when they're nickel, and it's not a position I ever would have thought that I would see him in the NFL. I saw him as an outside press man corner. So it is one of those things that's tricky, right? Like you want to evaluate guys and be able to say, here's what they're good at, here's what they're not good at. But
here's the other thing, John, and this. They might look at all their corners and say, you know what? if we keep Murphy Bunting outside, we don't have someone we feel good about that can play the slot.
That's exactly right.
And we're going to make our defense worse if we keep him outside. So maybe it's a function of, hey, we like Murphy Bunting more than Jamal. I'm just talking here out of my what. I don't know this for a fact. They may say, we like Murphy Bunting more than Jamal Dean, but when we play nickel, which is going to be, 70% of our snaps, if we keep Murphy Bunting outside, overall, we're not going to be very good. So our best three has Murphy Bunting in the slot. Maybe that's the thought process. Who knows? But it could be that.
Yeah.
Right.
Good. My last question for you from the defensive side is Devon White, right? If you scout the stat sheet, right, you see some of the production Devon White has had. 109 tackles. It's 19 more than Levante David, who's a hell of a linebacker. 5 sacks, 2 pass breakups, a forced fumble recovery. Made some impactful plays. Scored a couple touchdowns at the end of last year. So statistically speaking, he's putting up some good numbers. From an analytics standpoint, a site like Pro Football Focus absolutely just kills the guy. I think has him rated as literally one of the worst 2 or 3 Buccaneer defenders on their team.
One of the worst linebackers in the league, I think.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know. I don't know who's doing that. And no knock on Pro Football Focus. I know a lot of the guys. I don't know who's evaluating him. I can't answer that. So,
but I wanted to get your perspective on White, because he's a bit of a polarizing figure. He's a guy drafted number 5 overall, and the splash plays are there, the athleticism is there. It's only his second season, but what is your evaluation right now into Devon White? And have you warmed on the guy or cooled on the guy since he's come in the league?
You know what? I mean, again, I'll give you my opinion. Again, I'm not studying him on every play, so please. But do you know why Pro Football Focus has him rated? What is their problem with White?
Mainly it's run process, reading and reacting to keys appropriately in run defense, but also coverage has been his weakest area. And,
so that means,
I'm
assuming then that would have to mean, and I'm sure this is so, because I know the guys at Pro Football Focus, that someone who was a former coach is doing that evaluation, because to know you have to then understand run game concepts and how, in a particular defense, what that linebacker position then is supposed to do. So you'd have to know that to say what John just said. It can't just be a guy who doesn't know that stuff. So again, I'm not studying him in that kind of detail. I think he's definitely a highly athletic player. He's got great size. And what I'm saying is probably very boilerplate now, just because I haven't studied him on every play. I think that he's very good going forward when he sees it. I think he's really good at that. And so if he does see it in the run game, I think he attacks, and goes. He's a good blitzer. I can't speak to whether his play recognition is bad or good. I just can't, because some guys I love studying like that over the years. Like I used to love to study Luke Kuechly like that, who I thought had the best play recognition of any Mike linebacker that I can recall watching in 20 years. So I used to make it a point to watch that. I haven't done that with Devon White, so I can't really speak to that.
Right. Yeah, he was Luke Kuechly was a special one, man. There's not many players.
It was unbelievable, John. I mean, watching him play, he just knew everything that was going to happen before it happened.
And Greg, just being down here covering the Buccaneers. I mean, you've got some familiarity with Greg Schiano, right?
Oh yeah.
And didn't it seem like Luke Kuechly was just like Greg Schiano's son? I mean, just the way they looked and acted and the defense and all that. And that was one of the biggest draft day surprises when Luke Kuechly got passed over for Mark Barron. That just blew my mind, because here I am.
That's right. So wait, was Barron the 8th pick in the draft?
I forget which number he was.
That sounds right. I think it was 8.
Yeah, because I think Kuechly was like 9 or 10. He was.
Yeah. And I just.
Well, I loved Luke Kuechly coming out too. Yeah, and I remember a lot of people talking about his speed, and I remember watching a tape. and I don't know if you remember this player. He didn't make it in the NFL, but he was big and fast. I remember watching Luke Kuechly run down the seam with Tommy Streeter, a wide receiver from the University of Miami. And he was like 6'4" Streeter, but he was like a 4.38 guy. And Kuechly ran down the seam with him on this play, which is why when you watch tape, you've got to watch full games, as John knows. You can't just watch, hit tapes or, And I remember watching Kuechly run down the seam with Streeter, literally 35 yards. He was Kuechly looked like a wide receiver running with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And he had probably some of that. You recall that play. I recall plays where he would be in like the middle, just like a middle hook underneath zone, and he would sense a crossing route coming behind him, and he'd get all the way to the far boundary and make a play. I mean, it was He had an interception on Thanksgiving Day for a touchdown, I believe, against the Dallas Cowboys a number of years ago, where it was the perfect combination of recognition and then ability. And it was, it's a play we did in the matchup show because it was just one of those plays. It was just playing it. You couldn't have done, a coach couldn't have drawn it up any better. Right. Yeah. He's a special player. And the Bucs have had a few of those over the years. I'm sure you remember Hardy Nickerson and Derek Brooks and watching those guys. And then now Levante David. I mean, we're going.
And I know Derek pretty well. Derek I've known for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, those guys, when you talk about the lineage of linebackers the Bucs have had, you realize Devon White, that's the position basically in Tampa Bay where the standard is really high for him to meet some of those guys. But
I don't know Devon White, so again, then it comes down to study and what you take in, process. It's look, all this is process. People just see the game on Sunday and they react to that, and that's fine. We want fans. So that's all part of the gig. But, I don't know what his process is during the week.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and then being able to play with Levante David, though, you've watched Levante David for years, even if he's
a great player. I loved him coming out of Nebraska. I thought he was a really good prospect.
Right. But even though undersized, that was kind of the knock on him, right? He's small for a linebacker. How can he play linebacker in the NFL? When you're that small, and nowadays we're more used to it. We see a lot of these guys come out of smaller linebackers.
But he was always physical. He was not a guy. He was not just a runner.
Yeah. Right.
He was a hitter. And I'll tell you what, speaking of that draft, I mean, the Bucs blew it. The seventh pick overall is where Mark Barron was picked. They got the Buck fans in the chat that are helping my memory here. He was picked 7th overall. So the Bucs whiffed on Kuechly, but at least they came back in the 2nd round that year and got a linebacker in Levante David. So
that was the same draft, huh?
Same draft, yeah.
Well, it's funny.
Pretty good.
Barron, I guess Mark Barron has had a decent pro career. I mean, it's not like he's been a total stiff or anything. Right. But I really was intrigued by him coming out. He wasn't one of those guys I said, oh, he's can't miss. He's going to be a superstar. But I thought he was a really good prospect, and obviously came from Alabama. I thought he was a really good prospect, and I guess people never quite saw him as a true safety because he kind of got moved to linebacker relatively early in his career.
The thing is it was right in that kind of like flux type of situation where the NFL was transitioning to, the John Lynch safeties were gone, and the enforcer types.
You can't hit people like that now.
You can't, right? And so the Bucs had a double whammy. They signed Deshaun Golston, who was one of those enforcers across the middle. And then they drafted one in Mark Barron. So they had 2 safeties that kept getting dinged for personal fouls and suspensions because of targeting calls. And
wait, did they sign Golston from San Francisco?
They did, yes.
He was a good player in San Francisco.
He really was.
So when they signed him, I thought, boy, that's a pretty good signing.
Absolutely. That's right around the time where in that Greg Schiano years where the league really transitioned and was throwing the flags, right? And if you led with the top of the crown of your helmet, it just eliminated the enforcer position. And unfortunately for the Buccaneers, during Schiano's time with Mark Dominic, they had 2 enforcer-type people at safeties. They wanted to continue the John Lynch legacy in Tampa, but the NFL said, no, we're not taking those types of safeties anymore.
Yeah, no, look, there's been a lot of evolution over the last number of years in the NFL. I mean, you certainly don't see, 6'3", 250-pound linebackers now, unless a guy's a super athlete. You just don't see those guys.
There's no Cam Chancellors anymore in the.
Look, I remember, was it last year or the year before? John will remember this well because he does a lot of draft work, obviously. But I remember the kid from Clemson, Trey Lamar, and I remember reading some people saying, "Oh, he's going to come in and be a star." And I'm thinking to myself, I don't even know if he'll make the league.
I didn't think he would get drafted. Yeah. I remember people out it was a first round pick. Yeah. Early in the process.
Yeah. Some people were talking about him like he'd be a top 50 pick. And I'm thinking, nothing against Trey Lamar. I don't know Trey Lamar. And I know he was a big time recruit. Was he a Florida kid, by the way?
I can't remember that.
But anyway, he was a big time recruit going to Clemson, obviously. And, maybe a 3-year starter, certainly a 2-year starter. And, did well at Clemson, but that style, because he was stiff. He wasn't a great athlete,
right.
And those guys just don't play in the league.
Right. Yeah. The Bucs have found two that fit the league style for sure. Now it's just about continuing to cultivate White, I think, into the player that he can be. Greg, I could literally watch or talk football with you all day and listen to you talk football all day and not get tired, but I know we got to let you go. We really appreciate you coming on the show and being able to give us some of your time. Probably kept you longer than I promised you, but it's been a lot of fun. We appreciate it.
Guys, I really appreciate it. Thanks. I enjoyed it a lot.
Absolutely.
So much.
We'll be back on the Pewter Report podcast on Sunday after the game. We'll kind of look at what happened in the games and in the picture kind of at that point, and what the NFC playoff picture looks like. And so we'll talk about all of that, and we'll talk about kind of the Bucs moving out of the bye week and back into practice, and we'll be back. So it'll be Sunday, and we'll do that in the evenings after the games, probably right around the start time of the night game. And then, yes,
even though no Bucs football, it's still a football weekend. So I want everybody to know out there, hope you guys feasted on the MyBookie Turkey Day free play that allowed all of you users to grab themselves a free risk-free bet up to $250. It's basically a free shot at trying to double your money. If you didn't get in on that, what were you doing? No, seriously though. Now is the time to get some skin in the game with MyBookie, where odd boosts, lightning deals, and free bets await all season long. And with the NFL playoffs right around the corner, we know who these teams are, and we know what they're capable of. It's not too difficult to find some value in the money lines. Whether you're a first-time customer or you've been playing with MyBookie for years like I have, there's no shortage of value to be found in the thousands of game lines, unique prop bets, and the contests they offer up every week. Sign up or get reloaded today. Find an edge, make your bet, and get paid. Now, here's the thing with MyBookie. They also boast a fully fledged casino platform, giving you access to all the classic table, slot, and card games you'd expect to find at your favorite local spot. The best part is, at MyBookie, the doors never close, so you can continue to build your bankroll even when the stadium lights have gone out. So make sure you sign up and play today at MyBookie. And when you do, use that promo code Pewter. John, let's see that banner up there.
Oh, yeah, Pewter.
Promo code Pewter. Yep. To get your deposit matched halfway, all the way up to $1,000. The terms are simple. If you put in $200, they're going to match it up to another $100 in your account. If you were already planning to bet this season, this is free betting money, folks. It's winning season at MyBookie. Use the promo code Pewter. Come join the fun and win some cash while you're at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff, man. I could listen to Greg talk football.
I know.
I love the stories too. Yeah, it was a blast. And so we really appreciate him coming on. Hope the fans enjoyed it as well. Appreciate you all interacting in the chat and sticking with us for this live show. And for all of you who are listening to it after the fact too, we appreciate y'all. Go tell your friends and family. Pewter Report, YouTube TV, Pewter Report podcast. Have them subscribe. Tell them to tell their friends and family. Spread the word about the show. We're closing in on 2K subscribers. I think we were further away when I first mentioned it than I thought we were, but we are very close now. So we are going to be rolling up to 2K and then going for 3K. And so we're going to have a lot of fun with the show for sure. So we'll be back Sunday. Make sure you're joining us Sunday night. We'll have the times tweeted out and everything to let you all know, but hit that bell and the notifications on YouTube. You'll know when we go live. So thanks so much for listening to another edition of the Pewter Report podcast. Out.